that is still the plan, but I'm sure more details will be coming your way. So today we have Dr. Linda Sachs, who says she is a refugee from the North, having grown up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and College of Physicians and Surgeons of Columbia University, which is now known as Bangalow School of Medicine. Her training is in pediatrics and neonatology at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. After a few years in academic medicine, she and her husband, Steve, and a few small children moved to Savannah, Georgia. Dr. Sachs worked as a neonatologist, primarily at Memorial from 1983 until her retirement in 2016. Linda has served on the boards of AA and the Federation. She has led 2 women's study groups, one in Savannah and one in Sun City, both of which are on hiatus right now due to COVID. And Linda also likes to present on research on eclectic topics in medicine and Judaism and present them in layman's terms. She is married to Steve, has 1 dog, 3 married adult sons, 3 granddaughters, 1 grandson, 2 granddogs, 3 grandcats, and 1 grand horse. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you now, Linda. Oh.
Linda, I think you are
Yeah.
muted.
Okay. All right. Okay. Can you do the next click for me?
There you go.
We're going to talk about the origin, some of the laws and customs, and the significance today. What I hope you'll get out of this is that you will be able to find your own significance for today. Next slide, please. So, to observe Rosh Chodesh is actually the first commandment to the Jewish people. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei Hashanah. This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. And this is from Exodus chapter 12. It actually occurs in Egypt, not in the desert. So why should Rosh Chodesh be the first mitzvah for the Jewish people? Well, every holiday is supposed to have a concrete aspect to it. Rosh Hashanah, for example, we talk about judgment. Yom Kippur, we talk about atonement. Pesach is freedom. Sukkot is happiness. This commandment to control your time, essentially, was in preparation for the Jews to make the transition from slavery to freedom. What God is basically saying that these months are now yours. You can do with them as you like. You can make your own calendar, as opposed to when you were enslaved and you had no control of your time at all. God basically is saying to man that you are controlling my time, meaning God's time. Because when you say today is the first day of the month, that is actually setting the time for all the other holidays that fall during that month. So if you are wrong in what you're setting as the first day, then maybe Yom Kippur is really falling on the 11th instead of the 10th, or the 9th instead of the 10th. But God says that's okay because you're really in control of that. It's the rabbinic court that actually had the control over what's going on here. And at one point in time, back in the temple days, Rosh Chodesh was so important that it was considered by the Jews and by their enemies one of the 3 key components of Judaism. The other 2 being Brit Milah, or circumcision, and the observance of Shabbat. Next slide, please. For those of you who are familiar with the Hebrew, and you go back and you look at the original, as opposed to other things where God says to Moses, okay, Moses, I'm going to tell you this, and then I want you to go tell it to the children of Israel. God is actually just talking to Moses and Aaron. And so when he says lachem, for you, he's giving them the authority to pronounce when the new month is. And by extension, meaning the scholars and the sages and the high court, the Sanhedrin. Okay. Which really, when I read that, I thought that really contradicts the fact that it's the first commandment. But you know what? There are lots of contradictions in the Talmud. So this is a depiction of the two witnesses coming and saying that they saw the new moon. Then the rabbis would say, okay, it's the new moon. We have to let everybody know. And since there were no cell phones or Twitter, they set bonfires. Next click, please. I need a click. Thank you. They set bonfires on the mountaintops. And as soon as someone saw the bonfire, they would go and they would light theirs. And that way, word would spread throughout Israel that it was the new month. Well, that lasted for a while. But then towards the end of the Second Temple period, the Samaritans, who were quasi-Jews and were enemies of the real Jews, would start lighting the fires on the wrong day to confuse the rest of the Jews. And so they had to come up with another system. Please click. And that system was runners. And so the Sanhedrin would send messengers that would run from Jerusalem to the outlying towns. And then people would go from there to declare that there was a new month. Next slide. Okay, click, please. Okay. We have a lunar calendar as Jews, but it's intercalated with the solar so that our holidays are still seasonal. Passover has to be in the spring. Sukkot has to be in the fall. And if you only had a lunar calendar, that wouldn't occur. For example, the Muslims have a lunar calendar and it is not intercalated with the solar calendar. So Ramadan can fall any time of year. This year it was in the summer. Next year it'll either be earlier or later. I haven't figured that one out. The lunar rotation is 29.53 days. And so each month, next please, each month has either 29 or 30 days. 5 of the 12 months always have 30 days. 5 months always have 29 days. And the other 2 months have either 29 or 30 days. Depending on the year, to keep it even. We add another month, 7 out of 19 years. It's called Adar 2. And it's called a leap year. But it doesn't occur every 4th year the way our leap years do. And Hillel II, who lived in the 4th century CE, actually codified the calendar until the year 6000. So I don't know what's going to happen in the year 6000, but I don't think any of us are going to be around to figure that one out. Next slide, please. This shows the positions of the sun and the moon and the earth. Just click it once, please. That's it. Okay. So when the moon is on the opposite side of the earth from the sun's rays are hitting it directly. And what we see is the full moon. Next click. Okay, click it again. Okay. When the moon is between us and the sun, then it's getting direct sunlight from the sun, but we only see the dark side of the moon. Click it again. We see the new moon. Next. What we're calling the new moon is actually a little sliver of the moon. The molad is actually the beginning of the cycle. Molad comes from the Hebrew word to give birth. It's the beginning of the cycle. Nothing is visible. And so therefore you can't really look at the sky and say, oh, there's nothing there. You have to see something positive. And so what the rabbis say is that when God was talking to Moses, when he said this month, Hazeh, it implied that there was something that Moses could see. So God pointed out to him the crescent moon and said to him, "This is the sign of the new moon." The rabbis had a question which they raised that shows you the rabbinic psyche. And they said, since we only record that God has spoken to Moses during the day, how could he possibly point out to him that there was a crescent moon? And the answer is that it was at sunset, as the day was turning into night, and it was a clear night, and so Moses could see the moon. Next. There is a ritual which is sometimes called Kiddush Levana, which means the sanctification of the moon. Other times it's called Birkat HaLevana, the blessing of the moon. It's carried out, I think, in some Orthodox circles. I have never experienced this even at a Jewish camp. But basically, it's done the first Saturday night after the new moon. You go outside, you're still dressed in your Shabbos clothing, and you bless God for renewing the moon. You're not really blessing the moon, you're blessing God. And again, this mitzvah is only binding on men, not women, because the women are home putting the kids to sleep. Okay, next. The relationship of the moon and Israel. Okay, there are let's see, a couple of things. Next slide. Okay. We know that the moon is always there, even when we can't see it. And of course, as Jews, we know that God is there, even not only when we don't see him, but when we don't feel his presence. Okay. The moon is our crown. It's our alter ego. The people of Israel identify with the moon. The moon is considered, and it renews itself the way the Jewish people do. The people of Israel, let's see, one more thing here. There you go. The moon renews itself every month, just as the Jewish people renew themselves. They have their ups and their downs. We wax and wane. That's why the mitzvah was given in Egypt, because we were very low then. We were impure, we felt worthless, but the light was just around the corner. Other downs that we have experienced, slavery, destruction of the temples, exile, pogroms, the Holocaust. And the ups, of course, the kingdoms of David and Solomon, the two temples, the golden age of Judaism in Spain, pre-World War II Europe, and the reestablishment of the state of Israel. Its constant change in the moon is always a reminder to us of our history and our ultimate destiny. The new moon also celebrates potential. Most other, especially pagan societies, had their ceremonies around the full moon. We prefer the new moon because it signifies a new beginning, potential, and Judaism is all about potential. Next. The next slide, please. Okay. Next. Next. Okay. There aren't a whole lot of laws of Rosh Hashanah. There's a lot of customs. Work is definitely permitted on Rosh Hashanah, but it is customary for women to not do some work, and we'll hit that later. You're not permitted to fast on Rosh Chodesh, so there are no fast days that would occur then. But if it were a personal fast, like you're getting married that day, you're not supposed to fast that day, you fast the day before. You're supposed to have at least one nice meal to celebrate the holiday. Funerals can occur, Shiva can occur, but there's not supposed to be any lengthy eulogy. And lastly, services are longer. Why are they longer? Well, want to hit it again? We have a Torah reading, which if it's not Monday, Thursday, or Saturday is an addition. We have a modified Hallel. There are, I think, 2 Psalms in there that are not said on Rosh Chodesh. Next. We add Ya'aleh v'Yavo to the Amidah 3 times during the day. We add it to the Amidah during the Musaf service. We do have a Musaf service. And if you're doing the Birkat Hamazon, you also would add Ya'aleh v'Yavo in honor of Rosh Chodesh. We used to have a congregant who's now deceased, Zichrono Livracha, and he was the minyan captain on Wednesdays. And if Rosh Chodesh fell on Wednesday, then you added all of these things: the Torah reading, a longer Amidah, modified Hallel, and a Musaf service. And he used to call it the triple witching hour. It's mentioned in the Amidah that we do have a Chorban Chatat, a sin offering that was offered in the temple, an additional sacrifice. Click, please. Click. Okay. The question is, whose sin is it? Okay. So in order to explain to you about the sin offering, we need to go into a midrash. Next. And the midrash is about why is the moon smaller than the sun. On the 4th day, God made the 2 great lights. And it doesn't say he made a big light and he made a small light. It says he made the 2 great lights, which implies that they were equal at one time. So the question becomes, why is the sun bigger than the moon? Next. The moon complained to God. How can 2 kings share 1 crown? It's not right. We each should have our own crown, I guess. Next. And so God said, you know what? You're right, moon. So make yourself smaller. So the moon was diminished. The moon, of course, complained and said, God, I asked a really good question and you shouldn't have punished me for that. And God said, next. God said, yeah, I guess I was a little bit wrong with that. I overreacted. And so he gave stars to the moon and in compensation. Next. And so the sin offering, according to some of the rabbis, is on behalf of God because he admits that that he was wrong. There's another interpretation which also basically says that no, the sin offering is from people because Erev Rosh Chodesh, the night before Rosh Chodesh, is actually called a Yom Kippur Katan, a small Yom Kippur. Next. So Rosh Chodesh is known as a woman's holiday. And the question that comes up is, why should it be known as a women's holiday? Next. Well, there are 3 pilgrimage holidays, the Shlosh Regalim, and they're all associated with the each one with the patriarch. Passover is associated with Abraham because of the lamb. He was told on Passover that Sarah would give birth. The 3 strangers came on Passover because it says that he made them unleavened cakes. Isaac is associated with Shavuot because Shavuot is the giving of the Torah, the blast of the ram's horn at Sinai. And of course, the ram's horn reminds us of Isaac, who was nearly sacrificed. And Sukkot reminds us of Jacob because it says in the Bible that Jacob made Sukkot. He made booths for his sheep to dwell in. Next. So the logical thing for Rosh Chodesh, since there's pretty much 12 every month, is that one of them should be dedicated for each of the tribes. However, the tribes kind of blew it. They went ahead, the men of Israel went ahead and made the golden calf. Now, the story of the golden calf, if you read very closely, Aaron doesn't say to the people, come bring me your gold and your silver and we'll make an idol. He says to the men, go and ask your wives and your children for their golden earrings so we can make this golden calf. So the men did that. And the women basically said, no, we're going to refuse. We're not going to have anything to do with that idol. And so as a reward to the women, Rosh Chodesh became associated with them as the women's holiday. The Talmud Yerushalmi and the Shulchan Aruch also say that it is very good for the women not to perform certain kinds of work on Rosh Chodesh. In addition, the women had faith, which the men lacked. If you remember the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, these are 5 daughters of Zelophehad. He died and he had no sons. And so the daughters came and they said to Moshe, this is in the desert, you know, it's not fair that this land goes to other people. We think we should be able to inherit. And Moshe decided, yeah, you're right, with certain restrictions. We usually present this story as a symbol of women's rights in Judaism. Even more than that, it shows that the women had faith. They're in the middle of the desert. Okay, there is no land to inherit. The land is in the future, and they're concerned enough about it. They have enough faith that they're actually going to get to Israel, and there will be land that they go and they speak their piece. There's also a second reason that the women got Rosh Chodesh, and that's because the women in general make better decisions. They didn't refuse to give their gold to the calf because they were stingy. Because when it came to contributing gold and precious jewels for the Mishkan, for the temple in the desert, they were the first ones to come. It says that the women came and then the men also came, because the women knew that that was a good cause that they should contribute to, whereas the men couldn't distinguish between that and the golden calf. Okay, next. A more logical view for why this is a woman's holiday is because of the lunar cycle of women's menses. Women renew their body monthly, and Rosh Chodesh is all about renewal. So that would make sense. Next. Women's lives in general are cyclical. First, you're a child, then you become a teenager, then you come into the childbearing, nursing segment of your life, then raising your children, and then menopause and afterward. So there's this whole cycle of life that women show even more so than men. And so that's one of the associations. Today, there are many groups that meet on Rosh Chodesh to discuss women's issues, to just have fun, to do whatever. It's also suggested that for women to celebrate Rosh Chodesh by picking an activity that they really, really like and doing it. One of the examples that was given in a YouTube I looked at was an Orthodox woman who gets herself a Frappuccino on Rosh Chodesh to celebrate. Next. So, Shabbat Mevarchim, the Sabbath on which we bless, is the Sabbath immediately before Rosh Chodesh. In the middle of the first millennium, as we said, there was no longer the bonfires. We had a calendar, and we knew when Rosh Chodesh was, so that you no longer had to have a visual sighting. You could just announce that there was a new month, and you could bless it. And this whole idea of announcing and blessing the new month happened after the Talmud. There's very little law in it. Next. It's done in synagogue at the end of the Torah service while the Torah is still out. Next. And it's done on the Sabbath preceding Rosh Chodesh. So why do we do it on the Sabbath preceding Rosh Chodesh? Well, it turns out that the Sabbath is the day when there are more people in shul than during the week. And so it was important that it be announced so that everybody would know when Rosh Chodesh came, what to add to their prayers at home. It actually reflects the fact that Rosh Chodesh was not deemed all that important, because if it was, you wouldn't have to announce it. What the blessing does is it doesn't bless the new moon. It blesses God for renewing the moon, for renewing the people Israel. And it gives us the opportunity to ask for many different things. So why should we do this before the actual holiday instead of on the holiday? Well, it turns out that blessings and prayers are very spiritual. You're supposed to tune out the rest of the world while you are doing your blessings. But there's a lot of work that has to be done during the month, and you really need to pay attention to that. So rather than try to do the two things at once, the spiritual and the mundane, what the rabbis said was, let's bless the month, and then when the holiday really occurs, we can really get into it. We can get out into the world and we can do really what we need to do. Next. There's 1 month that we don't do the blessing of the month, and that is we don't do it before Tishrei. Tishrei is the month in which the Rosh Chodesh of the month is actually Rosh Hashanah. And the rabbis felt that everybody knows when Rosh Hashanah is coming, so you don't really need to mark it. Next. Okay. This is the end of the blessing. Okay, for those of you who may not have ever heard it before. May he who performed miracles for our fathers and redeemed them from slavery to freedom speedily redeem us and gather our dispersed people from the four corners of the earth, uniting all of Israel, and let us say Amen. Rosh Chodesh, and then they put in the name of the month, which the upcoming one is Cheshvan, will be on, it's going to be Saturday night, Sunday, and Monday, which comes to us for good. May the Holy One, blessed be he, renew for it for us and for all his people, the house of Israel, for life and peace, for gladness and joy, for deliverance and for consolation. And let us say Amen. Next. Then comes a laundry list of things that we are asking for. You can look that over. The ones that are in red, I'm going to just talk a little bit more about. One thing that strikes you when you look at this is that it is kind of a selfish list. You're looking at things which you're asking specifically for yourself. Now, we've prayed for everybody, with that other half about for all of Israel. But this seems to be somewhat, somewhat selfish. So Rav Kook, who was the former chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel, commented on some of these things and suggested that there's a different way to look at it. Next. Keep clicking. What he says is that long life doesn't mean a long life because you're only asking for the month. What it means is a life that is filled with accomplishments, with things that you have done. And it's really the preamble for the things that follow. Click it again. Again. And one more time. Next. Okay. Life of peace doesn't refer to peaceful relations with others, but it refers to inner peace and how to achieve that. What Rav Kook says is that you shouldn't let other people define who you are. Don't let your shortcomings disrupt the person that you strive to be. Remind yourself of your worth, that you need to go and face the world and accomplish what you need to accomplish, despite your flawed character traits, confusion, intellectual blunders. All of these things stand in the way of our spiritual growth, and we need to try to overcome them to get our inner peace. Next. A life of good really means that we want the influences on our life to influence us for good. It's not a request for affluence or for parties or anything like that. It simply means that whatever happens to us, we need to look at it and to make good out of it. We cannot control external forces. So we can pray that those external forces will influence us constructively in good directions and in positive ways. Click. Click. Basically make lemonade out of lemons. Click. The other thing is that we need to see if we can also be an influence for good to others. Next. Life of blessing means a life of giving blessings to others by being charitable, by donating to the food bank in pandemic times, by being kind, by providing moral support to those who are grieving, and to provide leadership and direction for our community. Next. Life of sustenance. Well, the obvious is the physical sustenance. Yes, we are praying that we have enough food to eat, that we have a roof over our heads, that we have our physical health. Click. But we're also praying for emotional health. Basically, we are boxed in right now with the pandemic. And it's very important to maintain our mental health and to help others to maintain their mental health. And lastly, we need the spiritual. This is a very recent picture. You can see a man davening with an esrog and a lulav, and he's got a mask on too. That's part of it. We want a life that's free from shame and embarrassment. No one is perfect. Next. Next. This is a picture of beating our chests on Yom Kippur. We know we have our faults. We're not perfect. Next. Our shortcomings and our weaknesses can be a source of embarrassment. I'm sure everyone has had the feeling at some time or another of they wish they had a paper bag over their head, or they wish there was a hole they could just fall through. We need to live with this, but we also need to hope that no one puts us in that position. Next. Our lives, the choices that we make, how we act, they should be free from shame. They should reflect only our better qualities, not our worst qualities. We should be able to look at our lives with pride and with satisfaction. Next. And we should avoid shaming others. Shaming and bullying is a very big deal right now, especially with social media. And we need to be very, very careful of what we put out there, that it's not needlessly shaming and embarrassing others. We ask for the greater good. This is a quote everyone should be familiar with. Hillel used to say, if I'm not for myself, who is for me? But if I am for my own self, what am I? So when we're asking for a life in which you will fulfill all of our heart's desires for good. Why do we tack on for good? Well, what we're talking about is so that it's for the good of the many, not just for our own personal good. We're not talking about utilitarianism. We're not talking about it has to be for the greater good and not for one individual person. We're simply talking about that we need to look at what we're asking for in a larger context. Is it good for our family? Is it good for our community? Ultimately, is it good for the world? Next. We all have the power to renew. These are my last thoughts for you, is that month in Hebrew is Chodesh, which comes from the word Chadash, meaning new. So it can be a new start. We can do it on one bite at a time. You know, Yom Kippur is overwhelming. We're looking at a whole year that's gone behind us, the whole year ahead of us. With Rosh Chodesh, you're just looking at the previous month and then at the future month. And that is a lot easier to tackle than to try to change everything all at once forever. Rosh equals head. And so you can look at Rosh Chodesh as the head of the month rather than the first of the month. The head of the month is like the head of the body. It controls everything. So maybe if you get a good handle on it on Rosh Chodesh, it'll last you throughout the month. There's also the concept of greeting the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the feminine presence of God. Just like when there's a new moon out, it means that the other side of the moon is getting direct light, direct sunshine from the sun. And like that, we should be going out to meet our source of light, God, the Shekhinah, on Rosh Chodesh. It gives us an opportunity to get in touch with our religious feelings. And lastly, I want to leave you with a thought that I read from a rabbi online, and that is that on Rosh Chodesh, we see only a small sliver of the moon, but we know that there's a whole moon there. Similarly, we see a small segment of the Jewish community. We all have our own little circles, whether it's our synagogue or it's through federation, whatever it is. We only see a very small portion. And maybe Rosh Chodesh is the opportunity, just like we're going to see more of the moon, to try to broaden our perspectives, to try to look at more of our community and to acknowledge their viewpoints and acknowledge that we're all still Jews, even though we may have different opinions on Israel, on Judaism, on politics, that we're all part of the same Jewish people. And I would entertain questions, but I have no idea how to do that.
I think that if anybody has questions, they can unmute themselves and speak.
Hi, it's Carol here with an
Carol.
an amazing amount of internet troubles and connectivity issues. But I want to tell you that it actually worked in my favor that you had a little bit of problems, because I could not get online. I crashed my computers 3 times today. But I want to tell you how absolutely wonderful your talk was. I don't know if you remember, but I started a Rosh Chodesh group years and years ago. And we ended up really more studying prophets. And then the other Rosh Chodesh group I had turned into a adult singles group. But I know that it was a very different, we did Havdalah together, and we did, anyway, that was a very different thing. And I finally decided I'm not the single person here. I need to get myself out. But I learned a lot, and I was just fascinated by the story, especially like the sun and the moon. I had never heard that midrash before. It was really
I hadn't either.
Where did you get that? And where did you get those wonderful photos for your presentation? Are they all just things you Googled, or you had a different
Yep.
source?
I'm the Google maven when it comes to getting pictures. One of them I actually took myself. That was the hand on the chest. That was me.
That was
I
very
figured
nice.
out how to do that because I couldn't find it online. It's everything here is from either my own basic knowledge from Google.
Yeah.
And also there are a lot of YouTube presentations out there that they're really good by, a lot of the ones for Rosh Chodesh are from women. And they run the gamut from, Reconstructionist rabbi talking about getting together on Rosh Chodesh to discuss your women problems to, very Orthodox women getting together to discuss, the laws of Rosh Chodesh or to study.
I like the idea of it being an opportunity for increased study as opposed to just a coffee clutch. But and years ago, in support of that, really at a time when women were first rediscovering the fact that this is a holiday for them, that Hadassah put out a guide, a Rosh Chodesh guide, that I actually followed for a while when I started one of the groups. But could you just talk a little bit to the fact that how women really rediscovered the idea of Rosh Chodesh?
It was actually the original discovery, if you will, of Rosh Chodesh was during medieval times. But the rediscovery, what coincided with the women's movement, women's liberation, 60s and 70s, that's when it first started. Then it kind of fell into disuse, and now it's coming back again. The study group that I have in Sun City calls itself the Rosh Chodesh Study Group, but our study is totally unrelated to when Rosh Chodesh falls. But we still call it the Rosh Chodesh group. I've decided based on my my presentation here that I'm no longer going to do laundry on Rosh Chodesh, which is a problem because Sunday's Rosh Chodesh and that's when I usually do laundry. So, but I just really was amused by the things that I heard on the internet. Like, you really shouldn't do the laundry, but you know what? You could put the laundry into the washing machine and ask your husband to press the button, which I thought was hysterical. But it's symbolic. It's remembering that today is Rosh Chodesh.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this.
Any other questions?
It's AM. I wanted to thank you for making lemonade today. We started out with a lot of lemons and you made
That's true. That's true.
It's a nice way of putting it.
I was momentarily panicking,
Gotcha.
and I had, since I sent the slides in, I had done a little bit of tweaking to the presentation. But it worked out. It's okay.
Linda,
Yeah.
I was particularly interested in two things that you elaborated on the blessing. And first of all, let me just say, Yasher Kolchech Kol HaKavod. It was terrific, and I'm glad we waited for and figured out the slide presentation because that really enhanced.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
The delivery. I know I'm familiar with the words for the blessing, but I never understood the implications as you described them. And two in particular, you talked about Rav Kook's perspective on inner peace. And I was wondering if you had a source or a reference for his teachings on that.
Not off the top of my head, but I have my notes. I know that it came from the internet. So
Okay.
I think if you Google Rav Kook and the blessing for the new month or something like that, you might get it.
Great.
Don't remember where it was from. It was not his original reading. It was someone else quoting it.
Okay.
And I'd never really thought about it because when you look at the laundry list, it seems like it's a very selfish thing. You're asking for all these things for yourself. And he kind of turns it around giving it more meaning. And he based that on the fact that this blessing, the original blessing, came from Rav, who was a Talmudic sage.
Yeah.
And
I actually take issue with it being selfish. I think it's telling us to give pause, and while we're out there doing tikkun olam, and while we're out there taking care of parents or kids, are we taking care of ourselves so that we can sustain the work that we're doing in the world?
Yeah.
And
that's
so
that's a great interpretation. I wish I thought of that.
and the other one was the life of giving blessings to others. Do you also, what did you Google to get some source material on that?
I didn't. I made the giving blessings to others up. I mean, it was Cook's idea that it means to give blessings, not to receive. But then it's very easy to just think about what are the ways that we can bless people, can enhance other people's lives today, especially today.
I attended a class at JTS this week, and the speaker was talking in the context of Musar. Nevertheless, he talked about generosity as being the source of other attributes like compassion or loving kindness that we wish for ourselves. And he talked about giving and receiving as opposed to giving and taking, and that the joy of giving, and how that kind of like comes back to us. And then someone said, well, what if you don't have to give either time or money? Your position right now is only to receive. And he said, then you give gratitude. That's what you have to give. And so this the giving blessing, as you said, you can give gratitude, you can give blessing if you don't have means or time, especially at this point in what's going on. So I really like that. And what you said kind of tied that talk together with the Rosh Chodesh message. So once again, kol hakavod, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh, just one. Will, and I guess this is really for Abby or for Jamie, are the food for thoughts available for viewing afterwards? I know that they get recorded, but if I wanted to listen to this again, which I might, is that a possibility, and how do we access them?
Sure. So yes, all of our Food for Thoughts now are live streamed onto Facebook. So you can go to the Savannah JEA Facebook page or search Savannah JEA on YouTube. And if you can't get on Zoom or just want to watch and not be participatory, you can do that every week at Thursday. Watch it in either of those places as well.
All right. Are there any other questions for Linda? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining in and being patient with us getting started today. We will see you next week.